All right, so my number one film that shaped my travel list is Out of Africa, 1985, directed by Sidney Pollack, starring Meryl Streep, Robert Redford, and Klaus Maria Brandauer. Quick logline: in the 20th century colonial Kenya, a Danish baroness plantation owner has a passionate love affair with a free-spirited big game hunter. That's part of the movie, but really, this is about Karen Blixen sort of moving to Africa just to find a different life with
Hmm.
this sort of childhood friend, actually the brother of the guy that she's dating in Denmark.
Hmm.
And it's a marriage of convenience, basically, to kind of get to a different world and start a new life. And then through this process, she ends up, building a home in this place, even though that marriage sort of totally dissolves, nothing really much comes out of it.
Right.
And then in the movie, there is this character played by Robert Redford, who's sort of this fleeting person who is the love of her life, presumably, but they never sort of really get together in the classical sense. So
Hmm.
it is it's a romance of the romance novels, really. But I think it happened in real life because this movie is based on a true story, I think.
Right. It is. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
an autobiography.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so this is my number one movie, because I think the thing that I seek for the most when I travel is adventure, and adventure not in sort of the classical sense that, oh, I'm going to go through, river rafting or jumping off, a mountain peak or something, although that could be a part of it, but really more about adventure in the sense that I'm put in a culture that I know the least about, with people that I have least familiarity with, and how that culture challenges me, maybe even pushes me, and ultimately you take away and you give some of yourself to that place as well. And that's, to me, is the happiest travel experience. So I think this movie kind of embodies that. And then secondly, Africa, I've never really been there, I've been to North Africa, Egypt, which
Hmm.
doesn't, I don't know if that counts, but I've never really been to Africa. And the first time I watched this movie, I was like, there's this whole beautiful, epic place, which this movie captures so stunningly. And the fact that we know so little about it in the
Hmm.
Western culture, it's not written about the way Europe is written about. And of course, there's a lot more to the continent, and every country has its own culture, its own
Hmm.
things. But I don't know, this movie really made me want to go there. There's no other place that I want to go more to than Africa. And of
Mm.
course, the different countries, maybe start with South Africa and sort of make my way up or something. But yeah, this movie really made me think of that. But yeah, have you been to Africa, and had you watched this movie before?
So I've been to no part of Africa, not even North Africa. I have always wanted to go for sure, and this movie definitely hit
Yeah.
those desires right head on. And this is an episode where, yeah, I can say you completed a hat trick and gave me three movies I've never seen. So this had this had been on my list for a long time, simply just because it was a Best Picture winner, and I had avoided it because I heard very bad
Yeah.
things about it, of that being long, slow, and boring. I
Mm.
definitely feel that it was the first two. It was long and slow, but surprisingly, it wasn't boring. I kept waiting, honestly, in the movie to get bored. And I don't really even know why I wasn't bored, because it wasn't like it was very interesting. The performances were fine. The scenery was incredible, other than some very poorly placed rear screen projection. Kind of getting
Oh
back to
yeah.
what we were talking about in the earlier, where these Robert Redford and Meryl Streep are clearly sitting in an airplane, in front of a blue screen. I
Yeah.
don't think that was necessary, because then you cut to these shots of this plane. I mean, that was a highlight of the movie to me.
Yeah.
Sequence when Robert Redford is taking her around in an airplane, this biplane, and
Amazing.
just the shots are epic. The scenery is incredible.
The
The
score.
score is great. Another John Barry, much like the previous film was also John Barry. John Barry score. I think he actually won the Oscar for this one.
You
I
did.
think. But just incredible. And to your point too, these are all real locations that they filmed on in the 80s. They didn't do any other than the weird rear screen projection. It felt like it was an IMAX National Geographic documentary during those
Yeah.
sequences, and it really just like pulled you into you. I just want to go there and experience this. It's like nothing else that I've ever seen. So I was very enthralled in those sections. But yeah, for some reason I wasn't bored, even though I kept telling myself I should be bored right now because I'm not connecting with anything that's kind of going on. But I wasn't bored. It was a weird experience. But I'm definitely glad I saw the film, and I definitely can see why this would be your Africa movie for sure. I had another movie that didn't make the list that was Africa for me, but if I had seen this one, it would have been this. I mean, these shots of the scenery are just incredible.
Yeah. No, I avoided this movie too for a long time, and I think I watched it a few years ago the first time. It was because of that reputation. And I was,
Not even the Meryl thing could get you over that, huh? I thought you would have
yeah,
seen
I
this
was
just because
like,
you're like, oh, Meryl,
yeah,
huh?
I just was
Interesting.
like, oh, this just seems too long and what
Yeah.
have you. And then when I watched it, I was sort of blown away. And I think that's sort of what the genius of the movie is, that yes, it's the cinematography and the beautiful landscape and everything that intrigues you and pulls you in, but you really are in her mind and in her
Yeah.
story, which I think is quite captivating. Like,
Mm.
her arc is pretty amazing. That this is a person going back to Liz Gilbert in Eat, Pray, Love, who's sort of directionless and maybe even a little bit selfish in the beginning, is not super kind, maybe even judgmental and a little bit uppity. And
Mm.
you really see her kind of journey throughout the entire movie, where that whole scene when the way they kind of cross the whole desert and the forest to for her to go and meet her husband, because
Oh,
the
yeah.
husband is on the front line, and she shows up there, in a time where, I mean, let alone even most men, but definitely not women out there on such a journey with her hair all over the place and,
Yeah.
covered up in dirt and mud. They've gone through attacks with animals and all sorts
Hmm.
of things. Like, you really put in place in that sense of adventure, and somebody who's been put in circumstances that are just way beyond them.
Yeah.
And I think that, to me, that's the part that really pulls you in, is sort of her arc. And
Yeah.
then the romance too. Like, you're sort of rooting for this couple, that something might come off it, but not much happens. But I don't know. I watched this movie now 2, 3 times, and there's something very intriguing about that, because
Yeah.
she is the kind of person who can, I think, foresee where this goes. She knows that there's no way that they could actually make it.
Right.
So she's very practical in that sense. So I don't know. This movie is one of those movies that kind of washes over you and then stays with you after you watched it, and all these different elements come together.
Yeah, that's interesting because I would describe it the same way. And maybe it is just some of the parts are greater
Yeah.
than the whole kind of situation because I can't pick one thing that I'm like, oh, this works so well for me. That's other than that flight sequence. That's why I would go watch this again. And I kept again waiting to be bored with this, but I wasn't. So something was working in there. And I think again, it was all the elements, like you said, kind of coming together. I thought she did an incredible job, honestly. Like
Yeah.
Meryl Streep, like totally lost in that part. Another great accent that she's got going in
Yeah.
there. Robert Redford was fine. I mean, he was kind of just playing himself as the reluctant
Basically.
American, like, oh, colonialism's bad, but I'm here anyway. He has
Right.
some line about like, oh, we're not owners, we're just passing through. But yet you're participating in the colonialism. So it's
Right.
like, okay, whatever, you're kind of conflicted. And that part of it too was definitely kind of the movie had a point of view of the colonists. Like she definitely was separated from the natives. There wasn't any kind of empathy there. There were a lot of things there. Just, hey, this is colonialism. This is what it was. This is what they did to these populations. But because it is so grounded in her story and it's through her lens,
Hmm.
I mean, it bothered me because I don't believe in or want to support in any way colonialism, and it just is something that it makes me very upset. But it's the time and the place, and it's through her eyes, and that was
Right.
her experience. So it wasn't something where I felt judging the character, even though again I think it's a deplorable situation that the Europeans are
Yeah.
doing in Africa. But yeah, I don't know. It's some of the whole. I guess it just I can't explain why it wasn't boring. I guess that's the best way to put that in the poster. This isn't boring, even though it should be, but it wasn't. And I don't really know why. But I'd watch it again. Like oddly, it's weird. I can't really
Yeah.
explain it.
I would rate it much higher than that, because that makes it sound like that it's it's just but it's not. I think, and it's a bit of a time capsule movie of that time when they were making
The
these
mid
big
'80s.
epic movies, the mid '80s,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe that's another reason why this and the English Patient, they all kind of get
Mm.
this sort of stodgy sort of feeling to it. But the truth is that from today's lens, you go back and watch these movies, they are epic, deservedly so, because they're
Mhm.
made on that giant scale and they're kind of amazing. Now I'm almost like why we should not be looking upon these movies from in my books at least.
Yeah, there was a period in that 80s and a little bit in the
Yeah.
90s too, where it was like, I don't want to say this this isn't in a negative way, but like knock off David Lean. They're like, how can we make Lawrence of Arabia and just put it
Right.
in a different place? There was Reds, which got all that Academy praise, English
Mhm.
Patient, this film. It was all just like Lean knockoffs, which that doesn't mean that they're bad, but they were trying to do what Lean is he's the master of that. I mean, his epics are like untouchable in my
Yeah.
opinion in terms of their quality. But this wasn't it wasn't bad. I guess that I was going into this thinking I was gonna fall asleep, get bored, but I never did, and it didn't seem long, even though it's a long movie. It's
Long
I
movie.
don't know, maybe that's Africa too. I don't know, but I definitely would love to go to the places in this film that she went into, and yeah, maybe Robert Redford can fly around in a plane. I'd be up for that.
Sounds pretty good. Exactly. And the other thing also that during that time, there's the kind of changing of the guard, right? Like all these new hotshot filmmakers with fast cutting, new ways of telling stories all coming up. So these movies sort of look like from a different time.
Hmm.
So it's sort of that moment versus now, if you look back at it, we don't make these kind of movies at all.
No, yeah,
So it
yeah.
just, yeah, I miss these kind of movies, to be honest.
Me too. Yeah, the big historical epic set in a
Yeah.
place, get lost in whatever the location is, telling a true story. Yeah, this is
Yeah.
definitely a genre that I really like too. And it's not something that there's a film, The Woman King, that came out last year that I really liked. That was kind of hitting that
Mm.
scratching that itch for me. That if you haven't seen it, I'd highly recommend that film. Hey there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through 3 of our favorite movies. Subscribe right now, or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.